Well, welcome everybody. It's nice to see such a nice crowd on this beautiful day. We should have had it on Friday because it's going to be 60 degrees. Then you wouldn't have come. But anyway, we are very, very fortunate to have Geoffrey Bar-Lev with us today. He's done many different things in his life. I'll tell you about a few. And he's been working since he was in junior high school. What was that, 14 maybe, or 12? But the one thing I like, and I don't know how he's still here, he was a cab driver in New York City. I mean, I grew up in New York City, so I know about cab drivers. Anyway, Geoffrey's a major author of a book entitled Discrimination, Jewish Americans Struggle for Equality. It was a reference book on the history of discrimination and prejudice against Jews in the United States. And it was in every middle school from 1992 to 2002. So we have a world famous author sitting right over here. In addition, he's authored essays on major world events throughout history, published in reference books. He's owned a niche newspaper, called Cuffed News. And when I saw that, I thought he was a box of Cuffed, which was sold in convenience stores in 23 Tennessee counties from 2012 to 2019. Obviously, you know he's a history buff. He studies the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, and related topics over more than 4 decades. He's fabulous. You know, he works here at the library about 20 hours a week, and he is so interesting to talk to. And then when he had nothing else to do, he ran an international freight forwarding business in Los Angeles. And now he lives here, and he is going to impart to you, I know, a wealth of information and wisdom. So let's give a hand for Geoffrey Bar-Lev.
Thank you very much for coming, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to begin by thanking the library and James Houston and Kristen Taylor. And of course, Wayne Lowell, who is the Ed Sullivan of the Art Circle Library. He's more handsome and has a much better sense of humor. So, how about a nice round of applause for the library staff? Okay. This is an extremely difficult topic for me to discuss, even though I've studied it for so many years. And after studying it for so many years, I reached a point where I was able to understand the Nazis, understand how their mind worked. And in some cases, even have some sympathy for them. There is this very ancient book that was written 2,500 years ago by a Chinese general, and his name was Sun Tzu. And he wrote a book called The Art of War, where he says that in order to defeat your enemy, you have to know your enemy, like you know yourself, if not better. So that's what I try to do in my studies, even though they're not my enemies anymore. We have other enemies now, which is an old story. I am what is called in the Jewish community G2, Generation 2, the second generation after the Holocaust. Both my parents were in Poland during World War II, which I will get into later. A lot has been written about people like me, but hardly anybody reads that kind of stuff. We have our own little organizations in various cities where we meet and we talk about what happened to our parents during World War II and all that. But there is no real platform for us. So, in view of what is happening in the United States right now, excuse me, with the increase of anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, now they are trying to say that there is another point of view, that you can view the Holocaust from another point of view. Maybe I am biased because of my heritage, but mass murder is mass murder. You cannot argue with mass murder. You cannot excuse mass murder. This wasn't only mass murder, but it was on industrial level. So here I am, and I'm supposed to figure out how to operate this gizmo here. As you can see, what's the back? The title of my talk is like Ashes from Auschwitz, the guy who lives to the slums of Brooklyn. I was looking at this last week, and I was thinking that something is missing. Something is missing from the subtitle. And it occurred to me. What needs to be added to it is, and how in the world did he end up in Crossville? Well, I ended up in Crossville because of business, but that's another story. I was born in Lodz, Poland, L-O-D-Z, which is 160 kilometers from Warsaw. That's 100 miles. Oświęcim in Polish is Auschwitz. It's approximately 35 miles from Krakow. Keep in mind, Warsaw is not Warsaw, it's Warszawa. Lodz is not Lodz, it's Łódź in Polish. Oświęcim is Oświęcim in Polish, but Auschwitz in German. And the reason why they call it Auschwitz was because Poland wasn't a country for 125 years until after World War I. So that part of Poland, that western part was governed by Germany, the southwestern part by Austria-Hungary Empire, and the eastern part by Russia. So, how do I begin? Do I begin in Auschwitz? Do I begin in Poland? Do I begin in Brooklyn? I will start in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I was in Sao Paulo, and I tracked down my father's business partner in Poland. And we were having dinner. And we were discussing my father, and he started crying. Tears rolled down from his eyes profusely. And he said to me, on the death march we were on, if your father didn't give me half of his potato, I wouldn't be alive today. I feel a lot of guilt in regard to my father. I was not the kind of son that made him proud. I was not the kind of son that would avenge him if there was any way to avenge him for. Maybe he was just too damaged by what he experienced. But now that I am at the ripe old age of 74, and I look back and I think to myself, I could have been a better son. So let me tell you what happened to him. In 1937, he was discharged from the Polish Army as a non-commissioned officer, one of the few non-commissioned officers in the Polish Army. Because, let's just say, all of Eastern Europe, not Poland only, but in most of Eastern Europe, there was fierce anti-Semitism against Jews, and they were discouraged from joining the armed forces. But so he was discharged in 1937, and in the summer of 1939, where Hitler began making noise about Polish border guards crossing into sacred German territory, which wasn't anything else but an excuse to invade Poland, because what Hitler wanted was the Polish corridor, straight into the Soviet Union. Flat, mostly flat. That's what he wanted. That's why he wanted Poland. So my father was recalled in 1939. He was in the Polish army. The war in Poland was over within a couple of weeks, and it took a few more weeks to mop things up. But he was captured, and he ended up in Czechoslovakia in a prisoner of war camp. In January of 1940, he was released and he went back to Poland. I'm going the wrong way here, aren't I? Okay. So he went back to Lodz. I will call it Łódź, because that's its real name. The name of the ghetto was changed to Litzmannstadt, in honor of a General Litzmann who was killed right near Łódź during World War I. So in January of 1940, the Jews of Łódź were instructed to wear the Star of David patch. In English, it's called the Star of David. In Hebrew, it's Magen David, the Shield of David. So he goes back to Łódź in January of 1940, and that's where the Jews are being herded into a ghetto which was in the most decrepit part of the city, and it was called Bałuty. At its height, there were 260,000 people in this small area. Why was Łódź so important to the Germans? Because they had a workforce there. They had factories where they used Jews as slave labor in order to make things for the German army. Let's see if I'm going the right way this time. The leader of the Jewish ghetto was Rumkowski. That was his name. Here is Rumkowski speaking with Hans Bibov. Hans Bibov was the civilian administrator of the Litzmannstadt Witch Ghetto. He had the kind of a job that Oskar Schindler had. But he was no Oskar Schindler. He was captured in Germany by the Red Army. He was extradited to Poland, where he was tried in Łódź, and he was hanged publicly after being found guilty. But he claimed the entire time that he knew nothing. But what they got him for was that he shot a Jewish doctor who was unarmed. That's what they got him for. What was life like in Łódź? Everybody was on the verge of starvation most of the time. I asked my mother, how much did you have to eat? And she said, when we got a hard loaf of bread and we had crumbs, we would lick our fingers and pick the crumbs up off the table and we would savor the crumbs. That's pretty hungry. My father was in the Łódź Ghetto with his parents and two brothers. One was older, the other one was younger. The older one was executed when he was caught smuggling food into the Łódź Ghetto, because there were Polish people out there who were helping the Jews. The younger brother, no one has any idea what happened to him. None. My mother was in the ghetto with her sister and her father. The winter of 1941, 1942 was a very difficult winter in Poland. So that's when my grandfather died. And just before he died, he called them over and he said, you hold my hand, and you hold this hand, and if you stick together, you will survive this. They did, and they did. In a way, I am alive here today speaking to you, and my younger sister, because of a decision that Hitler personally made. Now, Hitler's birthday is on April 20th. Coincidentally, April 20th is also National Marijuana Day. Which might be a very conflicted day for a child of the 1960s like me. But what happened was, when the Jewish ghetto in Warsaw exploded, Warszawskie ghetto in Polish, where there was a revolt, and it was put down. It took a lot to put that revolt down. In the beginning, the SS said, we don't need to send German troops against the Jews. So they sent Lithuanian auxiliaries who got massacred. And it went on and on for a couple of months, and what the Nazis did is they bombed the Jewish ghetto in Warsaw, what was left of it, in 1943, in the spring of 1943. And they constantly shelled it. So Himmler, who was in charge of the SS and the Gestapo, he ordered all of the ghettos in Poland to be liquidated. Hitler's architect, Albert Speer, who was one of Hitler's favorites, went over Himmler's head and appealed to Hitler. And he told Hitler, I have a disciplined working force in Lodz. We're not doing very well in Russia. We need them. Don't liquidate the Łódź ghetto. Don't liquidate Liesmanstadt. Hitler agreed. That was in the spring of 1943. If my parents were deported in 1943, they wouldn't have survived. Most likely, like 99%, they would not have survived. So the Łódź ghetto just kept on going. It was run by Rumkowski, who was in his mid-60s. His title was Der Älteste der Juden, the eldest of the Jews. And the Jewish administration was called the Judenrat. They borrowed this from the times of the Middle Ages, where there was a Jewish council wherever Jews lived, and that's whom the Polish population would deal with. The German population would deal with, in whichever country they were in. There was always a Jewish council. So the SS told Rumkowski, either you do it or we will do it for you. And if we do it for you, you won't like it. So Rumkowski recruited a police force from the Jewish underworld. These guys were mafioso types. So in that ghetto, they were the police force. So when the SS told Rumkowski, we need 20,000 Jews for resettlement in the east, in Polish it was called wysiedlenie. Rumkowski had to choose who would be put on the list and who would not be put on the list. Every Jewish leader committed suicide and wouldn't do it, but he did. Was he a collaborator? Was he a perpetrator? Was he a victim? Was he all of the above? Maybe he was all of the above. In any case, a very large number of Jews from the Liesmanstadt ghetto did survive. There were times that ghetto was so crowded that they had to have traffic police for pedestrians. That's how crowded it was. And they were all on the verge of starvation. My father, because of his military training, was appointed by the Jewish council, by the Judenrat, to guard the food supply. So he got extra food because they wanted him to be stronger. He was married. I actually saw a picture of his first wife, which is at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. In Hebrew, Yerushalayim. And because they had extra food, she was able to get pregnant. Whereas the majority of the women in the ghetto, they were so emaciated that they didn't get their periods and they couldn't get pregnant. But anyway, the Soviet army began closing in on Poland. So the SS decided that Łódź ghetto had to be liquidated. It was liquidated between August 3rd and August 28th of 1944. My father was on one of the last trains out of Łódź with his wife and his 4-year-old baby daughter. When they got off the trains in Birkenau, which is actually called Auschwitz II, it was built specifically for Jews and became operational in 1943. There was gravel. And they had them line up on the gravel, 5 rows of men on one side, 5 rows of women on the other side, and the children. And they went through that selection process. If you were told to go right, you most likely would end up in slave labor. If you were told to go left, you would be executed in the gas chambers in Auschwitz II, where there were 2 gas chambers there. There isn't anything to look at right now. I had pictures of them, but it's rubble. You know, there is nothing to see. I didn't, and I will not show any pictures of Auschwitz because we have all watched the History Channel, which was the Hitler Channel for a good many years. So, according to my father, his wife was told, if you give up the child, you might live. She would not give up the child, so she went straight into the gas chamber with the child. And he went right into slavery. He was in Auschwitz for approximately 3 weeks. And he was transferred to a concentration camp called Flossenburg outside of Nuremberg. Nasty place. Ugh. Five days before the American army liberated Nuremberg, the SS put the remaining 15,000 Jews on a death march, which lasted for 27 days. As my father used to say, 27 days and 27 nights. If you slowed up, you got shot. If you had to go to the bathroom on the side, you got shot. If you limped, you got shot. If anybody had to help you walk for an extended period of time, you got shot. At the end, they ended up in Lidice, Czechoslovakia, where the SS commander abandoned them because the war was just about over. So he just left them there. My father was about 5'8". I estimate from what he told me that he probably weighed about 85, 90 pounds when the Red Army found him in Lidice, Czechoslovakia. Now, this particular commander, as he was marching these remaining Jews, there were SS motorcycles with the sidecars with machine guns. If they would find any Jews anywhere, they would mow them down with machine guns, and they run into those a couple of times during the death march. The commander would say, "Nobody kills my Jews." And then they ended up in Czechoslovakia after going through the mountains that had snow. And the Russian army found them. The Soviet army found them. And these were uneducated Russians who came from rural areas back in Siberia and in Eastern Russia. These weren't educated people. These were just very young Russian boys who were conscripted into the Red Army. Everybody was asking for food because they were hungry. Those that ate anything died. My father, because of his military training, refused food. He said, just give me a little water. And then, after he had a little water, he asked for a little milk. And said for anything that was like baby food, you know, it was really mashed up real good. So slowly, he recuperated. My mother, who was a seamstress in the ghetto, making all kinds of stuff for the German army, was left in the ghetto after it was emptied out. At random, there were 700 people that were chosen to stay in the ghetto. This microphone is going to get upset with me. They left 700 people in the ghetto in order to go from apartment to apartment and salvage anything that could be used in Germany. Now think about this. These are people who lived in squalor, who had nothing. But there were still some things that Germany needed. So imagine how bad this situation must have been in Germany. There are historians who claim, and I haven't really decided yet, that one of the main reasons for the Holocaust was that Germany was running out of food. And the war in Russia wasn't going well. Because what Stalin did is he ordered the Russian population to inflict a scorched earth policy on the Germans so they couldn't get food. So it had to come from Germany. They had too many mouths to feed, so they had to kill people in order to have the food to feed their own armies and their own countrymen. I think that it's a point to be considered, but I don't think that it was the ultimate cause of the Holocaust, because the ultimate cause of the Holocaust is anti-Semitism. Now, I can talk about anti-Semitism from its origins in antiquity for the next 5 hours. And I will be happy to do that if you want to stay. But I don't think that this topic is that much fun, that you want to stay here all day long. So, what actually happened was my mother's sister, my aunt, was chosen to stay, and she asked the guy, could my sister stay with me? And he said yes, and that's how she ended up staying in the ghetto. 177 people in the ghetto went into hiding and didn't go on the trains. So those 700 were leaving food for the ones in hiding. Because now there was nobody in the ghetto anymore except them, so there was extra food, so they were leaving them. January 17th, 1945, these 700 people were ordered to dig their own graves and report back the following morning, which they did. My mother and a sister and a few other people hid in a water tower, standing in water up to their knees for 2 days. Do you imagine in January? You know, if you had to go, where would you go? You know, they stayed in that water tower. On January 19th, they heard tanks coming in. So they looked out and they saw a T-34, a Soviet tank with a red star on it, and they came out. So what was left of the Nismajstad Łódź ghetto when it was liberated by the Russians was 877 people. As a child, we never went to that part of the city where the ghetto was. I have all kinds of slides over here. But it would be much better, I think, than if I tell you about it, because pictures are pictures, you know what I mean? I am speaking to you as me. What I experienced. So what was my experience with 2 survivors in the Holocaust? My father came back to Łódź, and there was hardly anybody left. That's when he met my mother. They fell in love, they got married, and I was born in 1948, in January of 1948. Even though Poland during that period of time was occupied by the Soviets, it took the Soviets until about 1944 in order to make Poland, to transform Poland into a communist society and a communist economy. My father was making money. He was in the wool business. He was like a millman. He was doing business with the wool in Poland and with East Germany. We had everything we wanted in Poland. In the summertime, we had bungalows on the Baltic Sea in Sopot. By the way, Anya here is from Poland. She was actually born in a place that is only 1 hour's drive from Łódź. And when we met here a few weeks ago, her jaws dropped. Am I right?
Yes, sure.
Because she knew about Łódź and she knew about the ghetto, and she is a Polish Catholic. My nanny was a Polish Catholic. She always wore a crucifix. She protected me. the kids in the apartment complex that we were living in would pick on me, and she'd freak out, and she would go to these kids' parents, knocking on their door, tears coming out of her eyes, screaming at them. Is this what you teach your kids? Don't you remember what happened here? She was like a second mother to me. Let's see if I can find her. There she is. I went to Poland for approximately 10 days in 1998, and I found her. She had diabetes and all kinds of problems, so I bought her all kinds of stuff. It cost me a fortune by the time I ended up back in Los Angeles. I had to go through the ATM machine in order to take a cab home. She was a true Christian. I will never forget her. She will always have a place in my heart until my last breath. So, we're living the life in a communist country, but I am constantly being told by my parents, don't talk about this, and don't say anything about that, and don't tell anybody what your father does, and you know how it was in Poland then. I suppose that constantly being told not to say this and not to say that when I was 5-6 years old, caused me to develop a stammer. I was always watching myself. Ten minutes after 1 a.m., I don't know what day, but it was 10 minutes after 1 a.m. The Polish secret police broke into our apartment. They searched the apartment thoroughly. And guess what they found? US dollars. In the communist world, if you owned US dollars, that was automatic 5 years in jail. So he was dragged away to jail. And his partner too. The guy that I spoke to in Brazil, in São Paulo, in Brazil. His wife, he had 3 children. 2 boys that I used to play with and a toddler child. When she found out that he was sentenced to 5 years, she went on the roof of the apartment building and jumped off. My father was in jail. He told my mother to get him out first. We had a lot of money. And my father had a lot of contacts because he was in the Polish army, so his commanding officers were moved up. So he contacted them, and they got him out of Poland. And then he ended up in Israel through France. So he comes to Israel, and Israeli immigration tells him, in a nice way. You are a couple in one of those concentration camps. You were like the slave master. I don't think that you will be safe in Israel. Which meant, we don't want you here. So he ended up in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Why did my father become his partner? Why they became partners? This guy was a couple who would beat other Jews, who was he a collaborator? Was he a perpetrator? Was he a victim? Was he all of the above? I don't have any clear answers. But I'm still studying the subject. So in 1954, we leave Poland. What I didn't mention there is that we went to Israel. How it happened. I was so young. I was only 8 years old in 1956. Well, see, I'm kind of losing myself here because this is very emotional for me. He ended up in jail in 1954, but we left Poland in 1956. And we got lucky again. We ended up in Israel right in the middle of the 1956 Sinai Crisis War. Okay? But there was something about Israel. I felt free. I felt my power again. I felt my strength. I used to watch those Israeli special forces walking around Tel Aviv. No insignia, no rank. Just a red beret in this, whatever you call this thing here. English is my fourth language, but and I admired them. I used to go on the roof of the apartment building where I lived in, and I used to stand on the edge, a little over the edge, practicing to die for my country. There was no doubt in my mind that I would do it. No doubt whatsoever. I felt my power. I felt I was a human being. There was a housing shortage in Israel at the time, so we had to live with another family for a time. Then they built some apartment housing on the outskirts, which was the outskirts of Tel Aviv at the time. And there was plenty of space to play. There were orange groves, lemon groves, watermelon groves. We would steal watermelons and run away. We'd throw them up in the air. They would burst. We were kids. We were having a great time. But my parents realized that Israel was going to be in constant war. So they decided to come to the United States because they lost too many people. They didn't want to lose us. They knew that my sister and I would have to go into the Israeli military. You call it the IDF. Israel Defense Force, but in Hebrew it is called Tzava Haganah LeIsrael. So we ended up coming to Brooklyn, to the slums of Brooklyn. If any of you have seen that old movie which was made in 1980, Goodfellas, that's my old neighborhood. It was a mafia training ground. What almost everything that was depicted in that movie actually happened. Almost. One thing that they didn't show in that movie it was a white enclave, a very small white enclave. On one side there was all black people, and on the other side of us there was Puerto Ricans. So as you could imagine, during late 50s, early 60s, we would have some nice gang wars. Okay? One time I came home with a mark on my face, and my father told me, if I ever find out that you're in a gang, I will beat the daylights out of you. So what did I do? I went to the library. Why did I go to the library? I wanted to know how to make a pistol. Since I couldn't fight, I had to be in with the guys, and in with the guys meant that the chicks liked you too, And if you remember, most of you probably do, they had those very tight elastic pants at the time with the behind the hairdos. They look really cool. So that's pretty much what it was like in Brooklyn. And we lived in that area until 1964, when my parents started doing better, and we moved to Queens, into Trump's neighborhood, but not on this side of the tracks, for sure. And I was already a half hoodlum. I knew how to make a pistol at the age of 14 by going to the library.
You're still in the library.
Yes, it seems that I can't leave the library. I didn't want to know much about any of this for a long time. It was 1960s. Drugs, sex, and rock and roll, I wanted to have a good time like everybody else my age was having a good time. I really didn't want to know anything about this kind of stuff. Yes, I would read about it and I would have questions, but I was young. I was in America, the United States of America. I remember in Poland, my father used to tell me about how much he loved American movies. You may not realize it, but the best ambassadors are American movies and music and rock and roll. But as I got older, I began studying this more and more, and I read everything in the English language that was available. So the question is, what did all of that do to me? Just for the Holocaust alone, I had to go through psychotherapy for 5 years. That's what it did to me. Now, there are psychologists and psychiatrists who claim that the G2s are the second generation victims of the Nazis. I feel that I was traumatized, but I'm not a victim. I don't feel like a victim. You know why I don't feel like a victim? Because I am an American. I don't feel like I'm a Jewish American. I am an American. What my religion is nobody's business. That makes me a conservative, by the way. I love America. I wouldn't live in any other country. And in conclusion, I would like to thank America. That flag is too far away, but I wanted to grab that flag for effect, you know? A little bit of drama here, you know? So in conclusion, I would like to thank all of you and the American people who allowed me into this country, gave me the opportunity to get an education, who made me feel like I was okay. When I say that people like you all over this country made me feel like I was okay, you know, during my college years, I had this friend, black guy, who didn't talk to white people, but he talked to me. And I asked him one day, why are you talking to me? He says, because you're not from here. And then I asked him, I said, I'm going to ask you a question and tell me the truth because I think that you're an honest man. I said, I realize that your people were enslaved in the United States and Jim Crow and prejudice against black people in this country and so on and so forth. But I looked like them. I spoke like them. I didn't speak with a Yiddish accent. I didn't speak Polish with a Yiddish accent. I spoke like a Polish person. Do I speak like a Polish person still now, after all these years? Do I have any kind of accent? Not really, she says. It's my first language. My parents spoke Polish at home. Well, not always Polish. It was a combination of Polish, Yiddish, and English. So, I have a lot to be grateful for. And because of the ideals of this country, which the majority of the people of this country have tried to uphold, I thank you for that. The United States of America is the shining city on top of the hill. Everybody looks to us, Americans, for moral guidance, for truth, for democracy. We are the moral leaders of this world. A person like me can come to this country and feel at home. I may not be a Christian, but I still feel at home here. I don't feel threatened. I haven't experienced anti-Semitism in the United States. I've lived in the Northeast, in the Midwest, in California, in Arizona, and now I'm here. Once in a while, I joke around a little bit, and then I say, I'm a true Southerner. I grew up in southern New York State. I went to college in southern Wisconsin. I lived in southern California, and now I'm in the South. Doesn't that make me a true Southerner? Am I being accepted as a true Southerner in this crowd here, in this group? Well, you all must be right. I have a lot more to say, but the time is running out, and I didn't think that it would go this fast. I have a lot more to say about Poland and about the Nazis and about Israel and about the slums of Brooklyn and about lots of things. But now it is your time to ask me questions.
How
Yes,
did you
sir.
get here?
Do you have a book about the story of your life?
No,
Of your family?
but somebody's writing it right now.
How did you get to Crowsville?
I was living in West Knoxville, and I retired for about 6 or 7 years, and I got bored. So I got a job delivering a newspaper, which was called the thing. It was a publication that had the mugshots of people that were arrested the week before. So I was working for this owner who didn't know what she was doing, and she drove the business into the ground. So I decided, since I hired all the people that were working for me, and these were people who needed money, like single mothers, you know. So, what does an old Jew do? He just takes the business away from her.
I wouldn't go there.
No, I had people that I hired. She was living in Atlanta, and I was handling everything from La Follette to Shelbyville, and everything in between. I had a partner who died on me, and he was handling the West, and I was handling the East, and when he died, I had to move here in order to handle everything. That's how I ended up in Roswell. But you know something, I like Roswell. There is no synagogue here, and if there was one, I probably would go once in a while on the high Jewish holidays. That's about it, you know. But this is a nice little town. I like the people here, yes sir.
Do you live in Crossville,
I live in Crossville,
in the city, or?
in the city. Yes sir.
Was your old nanny able to remind you of any of your old nursery rhymes or songs?
No, but we had a lot of things to talk about. Number one, when I knocked on her door and she opened up the door, I got speechless. I couldn't say a word. And then when I finally said her name, she recognized me. Yeah. So she mainly wanted to know about me, what was going on, what happened in Israel, how did we end up in the United States, what happened, you know, etc.
How did you track her down?
My mother used to send her money on a regular basis over all those years. So she had an old address. We weren't sure if she was still there or not, but I had that old address, and I went to some government agency there, and I said, I have this address for this person. They gave me her real address, and that's how I found her.
Geoffrey, you know, your narrative about thanking America, the lack of prejudice that we felt, you know, it's a breath of fresh air, because a lot of young people today are reading about critical race theory, about all the things that America's done wrong, all the prejudice, all the discrimination that's built into, you know, white privilege and all that. And it, you know, it would be a good, healthy dose of fresh air if you could go into some of the local schools and give the testimony you just gave us, so they can hear something from a different perspective. So I appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you for speaking.
You're very welcome. Well, it's my pleasure. I think we have one more question.
Is your book that you wrote for middle school children, is it available in our library?
No. Where is it available, Kristen?
There's only about 2 copies in the state. It is out of print and nigh impossible to get your hands on. I have tried.
Okay.
Because what happened was, in the year 2002, when it was removed, you could get it used for like $2, $3.
But that's been 20
Now
years.
there are only 2 left, and they're asking for like $53 each. So, but at the time it was highly praised. I didn't that it really deserved it, but if they thought so, it was fine with me. Yes, ma'am.
Have you visited any or a number of Holocaust museums, including Washington?
I haven't been to the one in Washington, but I went to the one in Los Angeles, which is an experience in its own right. I don't need to go to Holocaust museums, you know.
You're a walking one?
I am a walking museum. Yes, sir.
Have you been in the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem?
No.
I was there. I cried for 2 hours. I walked through there.
What can I tell you? I can tell you this though. And it's the last thing because we have to end this, right?
You gotta bring the next class.
Okay. What happened after World War II and all of the horrific things that happened during World War II, not only the Holocaust, because the Nazis also killed 3.5 million Catholic Poles, right? Okay, so it wasn't only Jews that the Nazis killed, they killed a lot of people. So what the world wanted was a time of normalcy. And now we're beginning to revert back to the craziness of the world, how it always was. Excuse me. I'm really sorry about this. Because too many generations have passed by and the world is just returning to the insane place that it has been for millennia.
And the curriculum in school has changed.
Sorry?
The curriculum in schools has changed a lot from the time I went to school in the 60s to now. And I blame the leaders of the states and the federal government for not going back to what it used to be. Not all of it, but like the Holocaust and the Civil War, teach it as a learning, not as racist.
Yes, you could take anything and turn it into a learning situation. Absolutely.
I think we're going to call it at this point in time. Some people have other things to do, and you've been very patient and a very dear audience. This is going to be at some point on YouTube, so you will be able to see this again. And Marjorie, that book is available if you want to spend the money on Amazon, and it's a third-party book, but it's expensive.